His name was Private Langston Holt. Born to a freed mother and an enslaved father, he enlisted in the Union Army in 1863, not because he believed in Lincoln's promises, but because he believed in something better: justice, dignity, and a future his father never got to see. They gave him a rifle. Then they gave him hell. Langston fought harder than most men around him, not because he was brave, but because he wasn't allowed to be afraid. He survived Cold Creek, saved two wounded officers in a rain of bullets, and carried the colors when the flag bearer fell. But history didn't reward him. When the fighting stopped, the praise went to white commanders. Langston? He was accused of desertion, stripped of rank, jailed by the very army he bled for. No one wrote about Langston Holt. No statues, no plaques, just silence. Until now, his name was Langston Holt. They never expected him to last. When Langston Holt joined the Union Army, some officers didn't even bother learning his name. They called him Boy, sometimes Colored. Occasionally, that one with the eyes. Never Soldier, never Man. He was 19, built from hunger, hard labor, and anger passed down like bone. Born free in name, but never in treatment. The son of a freed woman and a runaway who didn't live long enough to meet him. He'd grown up in the backwoods of Kentucky, where freedom was a word white men used when it suited them. He'd enlisted in 1863, walking barefoot for 2 days just to reach the colored recruitment camp in Louisville. All he had was a sack of boiled cornmeal, his father's broken knife, and a worn letter signed by a white preacher swearing he could read and write. The man at the desk barely glanced at the paper. "You're in. Uniforms to the left, rifles to the right. Try not to die in the first week." That was the welcome Langston got from the country he was supposed to die for. They gave him a musket so old it misfired in damp air and boots too tight to run in. But Langston stood tall anyway. He trained in silence, didn't complain, didn't laugh, didn't join the other men in cards or hymn singing. Not because he was cold, but because he knew eyes were always on him, waiting for him to slip, to be the one that couldn't hack it. The first white sergeant assigned to his unit took one look at him and said, "You're a small one. You'll probably die holding someone else's gear." Langston didn't answer. He just trained harder, fired straighter, ran farther, learned to read maps when others learned to drink. He didn't want to prove them wrong. He just wanted to come back alive. They sent him to Cold Creek Ridge 2 months later. The battle was hell. Union boys falling like flies, smoke so thick you couldn't see your own hands. Langston kept low, kept firing. When the color bearer dropped with a shot through the chest, Langston didn't think. He just grabbed the flag, ran through gunfire, and planted it behind a stone wall where the line could rally. For 5 minutes, he held that ground, alone. When his unit finally pushed through, they found Langston with blood in his hair and a bullet in his leg. But the flag still standing. The officers clapped each other on the back. One of them, a young lieutenant named Collins, patted Langston's shoulder and said, "Damn fine courage. You'll get a mention in the report." He didn't. Collins got a medal. Langston got a limp. After the battle, Langston was assigned to post guard duty near a supply depot in Tennessee. He thought it'd be quieter. He thought the worst was behind him. He was wrong. One night, a white corporal caught Langston reading a discarded officer's field manual by lantern light. The next morning, Langston was called into the tent. A major sat behind the desk, scowling. "Soldier, we've received reports that you were tampering with classified military documents." Langston stood still. "It was an abandoned book, sir. Just reading it." "Reading? Who taught you?" "My mother. She used the Bible." The major leaned forward, voice like steel. "A colored private has no business reading officer material. You've overstepped. That's a breach of decorum at best, espionage at worst." Langston was stunned. He wasn't arrested that day. Not yet. But from that moment on, he was watched. His mail went missing. His rations came late. And soon, the real betrayal came. Langston didn't speak to anyone for a while after that meeting with the major. He kept to his post, polished his weapon, ate what rations he could when they weren't accidentally misplaced. Even the other black soldiers started avoiding him, not because they didn't respect him. They did, but because being near Langston was becoming dangerous. Trouble follows men who stand too tall. That winter, while guarding the supply yard in Chattanooga, Langston was assigned to night watch. He found two white privates, both drunk, trying to loot crates of tobacco meant for the front lines. Langston ordered them to stand down. They didn't listen. He raised his rifle, not to fire, just to warn. And that was the moment everything unraveled. The next morning, the two men were brought in bruised, sobbing, slurring about how Private Holt had threatened to kill Union soldiers. They claimed he aimed a loaded rifle, that he was drunk, that he cursed the U.S. Army and said he should have joined the Rebs. All lies. But they were white. And Langston? He didn't even get to speak at the hearing. The trial was a tent, 3 officers behind a table, 1 Union chaplain sitting off to the side, pretending to take notes. Langston stood at attention while they read the charges. Insubordination, threatening fellow soldiers, dereliction of duty. He wanted to speak. He wanted to say the truth, that the only thing he ever raised was the flag. That he never drank, never cursed, never failed his post. But when he opened his mouth, the major cut him off. This hearing isn't about talking, Private. It's about judgment. Langston clenched his fists, then forced them open again. The chaplain didn't make eye contact. One of the officers smirked. It took all of 10 minutes. Sentenced to hard labor, effective immediately, stripped of rank and rifle, assigned to supply transport at Stonepath Prison Depot. That was it. A man who'd bled for the Stars and Stripes, now chained by the same flag. As he was escorted out of camp, hands shackled, Langston saw the same white lieutenant who'd promised he'd get a mention. Collins didn't even look up. Stonepath wasn't a prison for traitors. It was for the forgotten, run-down, underfed, crawling with disease. Prisoners and disgraced soldiers worked side by side, dragging crates, fixing fences, burying the dead. Langston was put to work within an hour of arrival. No break, no explanation, no appeal. They gave him a rusted shovel, a cracked canteen, and a warning. Step out of line and you'll get the lash. It wasn't the South, not the Confederacy. It was his own army. Nights were the hardest. Langston would lie in a wooden shed with no windows, staring at the ceiling, his hands blistered, his uniform tattered, his dignity shattered. And yet, he wasn't broken. He still remembered every name of the men who died beside him, still saw the flag fluttering above Cold Creek, still whispered verses his mother taught him when he was too tired to cry. They can chain the body, she'd said once, but never the soul. And he believed her, until he heard they were erasing his name. One morning, an old mail clerk, half-blind and coughing blood, slipped him a folded page while tossing rations. It was a training log. One Langston had signed when he first enlisted. His name had been crossed out, not marked discharged, erased. Like he'd never fought, like he'd never existed, like he was a threat to the story they wanted to tell. And in that moment, Langston Holt realized something deeper than betrayal. They weren't just punishing him. They were making sure no one would ever remember he'd been there at all. Langston stopped talking for a while, not because he gave up, but because no one listened when he did. At Stonepath, words were currency, and black soldiers didn't have enough to spend. Orders were barked, not explained. Pain was punishment. Silence was expected. A wrong glance could earn you an empty belly or a busted rib. Langston learned to keep his eyes low, but his mind sharp. He started watching. Not just the guards, the paperwork, the rotations, the men who came and went but never came back. One day, while loading crates of munitions, he caught sight of a manifest bearing his old regiment's name, Company F, 41st Infantry. The same unit that bled at Cold Creek. Next to his name, a red mark. Not wounded, not dishonorably discharged. Just one word: void. They weren't just trying to ruin him, they were rewriting him out of the war. But the truth has a way of creeping back. Langston found help in the last place he expected, a white soldier named Isaac Marin, a medic turned janitor who'd been busted down for questioning an officer's supply theft. Marin had a busted eye and a quiet anger that lived in his chest like coals. He didn't talk much either, until one night, after Langston passed out from heat and exhaustion, Marin dragged him into the supply tent and whispered, "They want you gone, Holt. Not just locked up, erased. I've seen your name vanish from the rosters, your battle reports, your medals, gone like you were never born." Langston sat there, wrists wrapped in bloodied bandages, staring at the floor. Marin pulled something from his coat, a folded page, a copy of a commendation written by Lieutenant Collins, Langston's former officer. It praised Holt's bravery at Cold Creek, his stand with the flag, his saving of wounded men. It was real, dated, signed, but it had never been filed. Collins wrote this, Marin said, but someone buried it. It's not in the Army records, but I found it in a crate marked for burn. I thought maybe you'd want it. Langston didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just held the paper like it was a piece of his own life dug up from a grave. That night, Langston made a decision. He was done waiting for permission to be seen. If the Army wanted him forgotten, he'd make damn sure they'd have to lie harder to do it. He began copying the letter in secret. 6 times, 10 times, 20. He passed the copies to anyone who would take them. Sympathetic cooks, wounded veterans, even a postal boy with crooked teeth who swore his brother died in the same battle. Each one carried his name. Langston Holt, Cold Creek Ridge, wounded, decorated, imprisoned, a man who fought for freedom, then got chained by it. Some letters were tossed, others were burned, but a few got through. A preacher in Ohio read one during Sunday service. A teacher in Pennsylvania shared it with her students. And somewhere in New York, a Black veteran wrote a letter to the Herald asking, "What happened to the boy with the flag, the one they never wrote about?" Back at Stonepath, the guards grew tense. Langston was still silent, still obedient, but they could feel something had changed. He didn't look broken anymore. He looked ready. And deep down, even the officers knew, you can chain a man, but you can't chain a truth forever. The first time the warden called Langston by name, it wasn't out of respect. It was out of warning. "Private Holt. That what you still call yourself?" Langston looked up, slow and steady, shackled at the wrists but free in the eyes. "It's the name I was born with," he said. The warden smirked. "Well, that name's causing ripples." Langston said nothing. He didn't have to. He knew what it meant. The letters, the whispers. They were reaching places letters weren't supposed to go. 3 days later, a captain from Washington arrived at Stonepath. Sharp coat, sharper tongue. He didn't look at the prisoners. He asked for files, memos, logs. When he asked about Langston Holt, the warden hesitated. "We had a Holt, colored, but he's long since reassigned. Might have died. Let me check the manifest." Langston, watching from across the yard, saw it happen in real time. The attempt to erase him, again. But this time, someone stopped it. Isaac Marin stepped forward, unprompted. He walked up to the captain, handed him the original copy of Collins's letter, the one he'd hidden under a floorboard for months, and said, "Before he's forgotten again, sir, you might want to read this." The captain read it, then read it again, then looked at Langston like he was seeing a ghost someone had tried to bury alive. A week passed, then another. Langston was pulled from the yard and brought to the warden's office. He was told the Army was reassessing his situation, that they had new paperwork under review, that he was to remain on restricted duty until further notice. It was bureaucratic stalling, a wait and watch. But for Langston, it was movement. For the first time in over a year, he stood outside a locked gate, unchained. Word began to spread in strange ways. A reverend read Holt's story aloud in a Baptist church. An abolitionist in Massachusetts printed a flyer, "Freedom's Forgotten Son." A letter was published in the Chicago Tribune titled, "The Man Who Carried the Flag and Then Carried the Chains." And in the barracks of Fort Griswold, a young black soldier pinned a piece of paper to the wall. It just said, "Langston Holt lived. Don't let them bury that." But freedom, real freedom, was still a long way off. The Army didn't want a scandal. They wanted silence, a quiet release maybe, a reassignment, something they could spin. What they didn't want, a soldier turned symbol. The warden, panicking, tried to provoke Langston, assigned him double shifts, sabotaged rations, sent guards to corner him, beat Marin within an inch of his life for smuggling contraband. Langston didn't break, he stayed upright. But inside, he was boiling, because justice that takes too long starts to feel like another prison. One night, standing alone in the dark, Langston whispered the only prayer he still believed in. "Lord, if I'm forgotten, let it not be because I stayed quiet." And then, he wrote his name on the barracks wall. Just that. No sermon, no protest, just his name, Langston Holt, carved into the wood where no one could paint over it. Because if the system wanted to erase him, He was going to leave marks too deep to scrub out. They released him quietly, no ceremony, no apology, just a folded paper discharge, administrative review, and a curt nod from a junior officer too ashamed to meet his eyes. Langston Holt walked out of Stonepath prison camp the same way he walked in, alone. His uniform was gone, his boots were cracked, but he carried something no man there could take from him anymore. His name. He went north, slowly, a rail line, a mule cart, 2 nights in the woods. He stopped speaking to strangers, trusted no one but the wind. But by the time he reached Ohio, something strange had already happened. People knew his story. Not everyone, but enough. A pastor greeted him by name. A school teacher gave him a blanket. One boy ran up with a crumpled newspaper and pointed to an article, "Union soldier wrongfully imprisoned, where is he now?" Langston said nothing, just nodded once, took the paper and folded it into his coat. He didn't want fame. He wanted proof he hadn't disappeared. He lived in a cabin for a while, cut wood, read books, taught black children to write their names like weapons, sharp, unerasable. Sometimes people came to see him, young veterans, widows of men who fought at Cold Creek, a woman whose brother died in the same battle Langston carried the flag through. They came not for answers, but for truth, and Langston gave it to them, quietly, fully, without shame. He told them about fear, about injustice, about the moment he realized his uniform didn't protect him, and how, somehow, he still didn't regret picking up that flag. Years later, when he died, there was no parade, but there was a funeral, a real one. Dozens of black soldiers, some old, some still in uniform, stood shoulder to shoulder around his grave. A historian placed a stone at his feet that read, "Langston Holt, he fought for a country that tried to forget him. It didn't work." And somewhere in a classroom in Maryland, his name is part of the history unit now. No longer erased, no longer a ghost, but a man who lived, fought, endured, and refused to vanish. Not just a soldier. A reminder that freedom has never been given freely, and the people who carry it often bleed for it twice. Once for the war, and again just to be remembered. Langston Holt's name was never carved into the monuments. But today, you heard it. You remembered him. And that matters more than statues ever could. Stories like Langston's aren't in most textbooks. Not because they aren't true, but because they're inconvenient, powerful, honest. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who still believes the truth deserves to be told, and subscribe for more untold stories, erased names, and voices that refuse to be forgotten. Thank you for listening, and thank you for remembering.